So guys, how's it going? We're back again with some more ANALYSE pros. This week we're going to be looking at Gallon versus Muzzy in the recent GM match. Now both players looked visibly upset with how the games were going, how the plays were during the game. So I thought it'd be an interesting match to look at. Where did they think they went wrong? What kind of mistakes do they think they made? And if there was anything better that they could have done. The first game is going to be a Priest mirror match, and it is a super mirror match because both players are running the exact same deck list. So I have here the mulligan win rates for the Priest mirror match, Legend to 5 for sort of decent sample size. It's pretty clear. Obviously, Northshire Cleric the best card. That one's fairly obvious. And then other than that, Tolvir's a bit behind, and then you have these groups of cards. The Light Warden, Silence, Extra Arms, etc. being fairly decent. So yeah, we're kind of basically going to be full mulliganing for the most part for these three cards, essentially. And maybe you can start keeping some other stuff if you already have them. Okay, so kind of simple mulligan really. None of these cards are particularly good from either side, so it looks like a full mulligan. High Priest Amulet actually has a fairly decent mulligan win rate in a lot of matchups, but not in the Priest mirror specifically. Okay, nothing to do for Gallon really. Passes turn 1. This is kind of useful information for Muzzy. He now knows that these 4 cards in hand from Gallon aren't 1-drops. There's an argument that if Gallon did have Beaming Psychic, he would not play it on 1 because the battle cry is so valuable. Some people might tempo it on 1 anyway if you have a follow-up curve to that, because the 1 damage and potential multiple bodies that you get could be useful for buffs later on down the line. It can be hard for the opposing priest to clean up all your minions, so just having that body on 1, body on 2, body on 3 or whatever is going to be harder for the other side to clean up rather than saving it for the battle cry. So there's definitely Gallon doesn't have Cleric or Light Warden on 1, that's for sure. You might have a Beaming Psychic in hand, but possibly not. So for Muzzy's side, he also doesn't have anything to play. No Cleric, no 1-drops, no 2-drops even. So for Muzzy, it's a clear pass, but what can Gallon read from that? It's possible that Muzzy would do something like coin Tolvir that's a play that could happen a lot of the time because you can just hero power it on 2 and it's decent enough. And there's also things like fully healing the Tolvir is potentially a powerful play, or going Cleric Circle on it or something like that. So Gallon might have an inkling that none of these cards in hand for Muzz are Tolvir, and it's definitely no Light Warden or Cleric because you would 100% not pass, you just play those cards. So that's for hand reads on Gallon's side. So for Gallon, he top decks Nephicet Ritualist, which is his only really available play. Obviously powerful later on with the battle cry, but you do need to get onto board. He does have Divine Spirits, Powered Shields, etc. He needs to have targets for, and he needs to play something. So 2-mana 2/3, while not great, is the best we've got right now. From Muzzy's perspective, the fact that Gallon plays this card here tells a lot about Gallon's hand. In terms of things that you play, we already know that there's no Light Warden, there's no Cleric from Gallon because he would have played them on 1, and this card he's playing now is top decked. So we know for a fact that there's no Cleric or Light Warden in Gallon's hand. And also in terms of 2-drops, there's no injured Tolvir either, because you would not play Nephicet Ritualist over a Tolvir on 2. You just play the Tolvir and then you maybe threatening fully healing it with this. So in terms of hand reads, we know that Gallon's hand, pretty much for a fact here, doesn't have Tolvir, Light Warden or Cleric in it, and it might not have a Beaming Psychic because sometimes that will come down on 1 anyway. So in terms of what's left for Gallon, in terms of hands that he could possibly have here, is something like what he has now, which is a lot of spells, a lot of buffs, hand buffs, that sort of thing. Or there's things like Amulet, Psychopomp, or Injured Blade Master, or the one of Acolyte of Pain as potential minions that they could have in hand. So there's a roundabout way of saying that Gallon's hand is likely quite slow or buffed based. Based on what he did on turns 1 and 2, we can gather this information, which is going to be important going forward. On Muzzy's turn 2 now, he top decks Circle of Healing, and he's facing down 2-3. So obvious play available is coin, Blade Master, Circle of Healing. You'd rather not use the coin here, probably because you have an Amit in hand, and it's going to be a bit harder to combo Amit if you use the coin here. But given the context of what we think Gallon's hand is, being either slower cards or buffs, it's quite important to get out the tempo early now, so that Gallon can't snowball that board with his already slower hand or buff-based hand. If we can get onto the board and get Gallon off the board, we know that he's going to have a hard time getting back on it because his hand is very slow. Alright, turn 3, and things are starting to look a little bit awkward for Gallon. This 4/7 Blade Master is kind of threatening to value trade pretty hard into Gallon's board. Obviously, if you want to play mana efficiently, the Acolyte of Pain makes a bit of sense, but the problem is it trades so poorly into this Blade Master, and you really don't get much out of it other than the singular card draw, which is fine, but I think you might end up losing too much tempo if you just play a 1/3 here. What's going to happen is that Muzz is just going to value trade into it, and then you're just going to have a 2/3 on board against a 4/6 plus whatever Muzzy decides to develop, and you're just going to be really far behind at that point. So I think you need to go for a bit more tempo here and save the Blade Master, save the Acolyte of Pain for later. Divine Spirit is also not so great. If you were to go like Shield plus the Spirit here, you make a big minion, and it'd be kind of hard for Muzzy to clear it outside of the silence or, you know, some kind of inner fire combo. But you really don't put much power onto the board because you yourself don't have an inner fire or an extra arms or anything like that. So in terms of like having, if this was a 2/10, you know, you draw a card and make it a 2/10, right? It looks scary, but in terms of controlling the board, it's kind of bad because the 2 attack doesn't really kill anything outside of Light Wardens and Beaming Sidekicks on its own. So you're like not really doing a great job at contesting board if you do something like that. So Gallon goes for the play of Shield first, which I think is correct. Likely following up with a Pyromancer just to kind of spread wide on the board. So if something like if Muzzy had something like an inner fire thing, you have 2 targets now. So he can't complete, and Muzzy does have an inner fire in hand, by the way. So instead of investing just onto 1 minion, by spreading out your threats, you leave yourself pretty much guaranteed with a minion for next turn. If you were to draw some kind of attack buff for it, it's potentially powerful. Also, if you were to draw Psychopomp, which would be a pretty good turn 4, it's nice to have, you know, one of your minions die. So Gallon does do the play that I think was correct, but then he does this thing where he bumps into the Blade Master. Interesting decision. So you sacrifice, you know, 4 health on your 2/1 to deal 2 to this Blade Master, which kind of, you know, if this trade here happens and he doesn't heal it, this trade can now happen, which is pretty nice for you, I guess, but it's somewhat unlikely, I would say, that Muzzy is not going to either heal this card on this turn or like buff it somehow with like Shield or Divine Spirit, etc. Obviously it's worse for you, Divine Spirit, on this Blade Master if it's got 7 health. It goes to 14 instead of going to 10 here, which is what would happen. It's a bit harder to kill it that way. But the problem is you also, by putting this to 1 instead of the 5 that it would be, it make yourself worse against things like Beaming Sidekick or top deck Light Warden or something like that. Like, it's reasonable for Muzzy, if he had drawn a Light Warden here, to spend his turn trading into this Pyromancer and then going Light Warden and just heal this Blade Master back up. And it's still a decent play now, honestly, if you were to do that, even when you do this bump. But the problem with it is now this is on 1 health. You can't value trade back into the Light Warden though. They'll have essentially a 3-2 here. So if that happens, then suddenly this 2-1 you have can't value trade, and you're going to be losing tempo essentially for that, in favor of like hurting this Blade Master a little bit. So I don't think it's too good in that sense. Another thing is that you can draw 3 cards, right? There's Topsy Turvy, and there's 2 Inner Fires, which are potentially good draws if you keep this on 5 health, because likely what's going to happen most times, outside of an extra arms or an Inner Fire, is this trade's going to happen. And if that trade happens, you really want to have the health on this minion still, because if you were to draw, I know you don't have them in hand, but it's potentially a good draw for you, because right now it's not looking great. You're probably just going to Psychopomp, which is fine, but you're kind of eliminating 3 potentially good top decks for you in favor of playing around some cards from Muzzy. One thing you do play around a little bit is obviously extra arms. If this was a 2-5 and Muzzy extra arms his 4-7 Blade Master, it would trade, it'd cleanly kill the 2-5 in 1 hit, which is kind of bad for you, but it's still so bad for you. Like, if this were to happen, if this turned into a 6-9, if this was a 6-9 and trades into your 2-5 in 1 hit, and it becomes like a 6-7 afterwards, and you've got a 3-2 against it, you're in still a really bad spot, right? You're not much better than if this was a 6-5, which is what the difference would be. So it feels like you shouldn't be playing around Inner Fire or extra arms too much in this spot, and I think I'd rather just keep my minion with a lot of health, just so you can play around something like Beaming Sidekick a little bit better, and you can play around, and you can play 2 your own outs, which is Inner Fire or Topsy Turvy, because if you have a 2-5 and your next turn is Divine Spirit Inner Fire on it, if your opponent doesn't have a silence, you're going to get a really nice trade into this Blade Master. So I like keeping that option open, because the bump really doesn't play around enough for it to be worthwhile, in my opinion. And the stuff it plays around is still pretty bad for you, even when you do this bump. So I think I'd rather keep this as a 2-5, honestly. And that way, and even extra arms as well is another card that's potentially really strong when you have more health on your minion. So not a big fan of this bump, but I can see why Gallon chose to do it. I just don't think it's a recipe for winning the game. Obviously, no minions to play just yet, so it's likely we're going to be seeing some sort of Power Word Shield this turn. Heal Inner Fire, not really necessary at this point. You don't need the attack buff right now, as this card is going to be able to trade into any of these anyway. So yeah, let's just start with Power Word Shield. Okay, so while Pyromancer's drawn, so potential to play that. It doesn't seem that great here. Like, you could go Pyro Silence, and then you get a full clear that way. That way, this 2-1's not looking to trade into your 3-2, which is something you don't want. Otherwise, you can just... That seems like a lot of resources just to kill a 2-1, to be honest. I don't really like that. I think I'd just take a simple line here and just trade into this Pyromancer and heal up your Blade Master. There is a little bit of merit to not killing the Pyro, in that a Psychopomp is fairly likely as a turn 4 response, given the reads we had at the start on Gallon's hand. We have reads on all these cards except for the Psychopomp here. We know they're all slow cards or buffs, etc. So there's a bit of merit, a very small amount, I'd say, for killing this card instead of the Pyro, because when Psychopomp brings it back, you've dealt less damage to your Blade Master, essentially. That's like the only reason. But I don't think it's enough. And I think the Pyromancer is a bit scary, because the problem is if you do this trade and then heal up your guy, and then Gallon does something like top deck Tolvir and then heal the Tolvir, then this Pyromancer is going to stick around and he can potentially do some kind of scary stuff with it. Okay, so Gallon's turn 4, kind of expected what happened. Right now you're pretty far behind on board, but you have a nice turn 4 of the Psychopomp, which is essentially what you have to do here. A little bit weak to Pyro, mainly because you got this on 1 health as well, which is something we could have avoided. It's kind of like an after effect of doing that bump earlier, has made ourselves a lot weaker to Wild Pyromancer on our turn 4. When we go for this Psychopomp, we've got 2 things with 1 health, and then the second half of the Pyromancer is also going to be on 1 health. We need to spread wide on board, and we need to put attack onto the board, and Psychopomp does both of those things, so it seems like a pretty clear play to me. Okay, so Gallon decided to trade his 2-1 into this 4-4 Blade Master. The reason why is a nod to Wild Pyromancer. He recognizes his board is very weak to it, and the 2-1's not doing too much for him for the most part in the future turns. It is a little bit nice to keep it around because you have this circle of healing in hand. Definitely some merit for keeping it around, because it's likely not the trade of choice for Muzzy if he doesn't have a wild Pyro, right? He's not going to be trading into this 2-1. So it's potential that you could, like, get rid of this Blade Master, which is reasonable, and then use a circle of healing to gain quite a bit of tempo on the next turn, because you can have a 2-1 that can be maybe a 2-5 just for 0 mana, which is potentially a big tempo tool if you can get rid of the Blade Master. Obviously, you don't want to be using circle of healing while this Blade Master is still around, because you're going to be helping out your opponent more than yourself. But there is a world where you don't get wild pyroed. You trade into this Blade Master, because he's likely going to trade into this 3-1 or the first half of this Pyro rather than your 2-1. So it's possible you can just trade back and then do some kind of circle of healing turn for extra tempo. One of the downsides of doing this trade as well, if we have the 2-1 here, is it makes Muzzy's circle of healing of his own way better, because he can essentially take a better trade and then circle and fully hit this guy and take off more power off the board, rather than having to worry about your injured guy. It also makes his ritualists way stronger, because he's Wind Furied his Blade Master essentially ends up killing both your 2-1 and your 3-1 before he fully heals it. If he just had a Ritualist in hand and he trades into this 3-1 while you still have this 2-1 on the board, this thing's going to have... It's not going to heal for as much, and you're still going to have 2 different minions on board. So it makes the preemptive trade again. I can see why he's doing it, because of this card, which Muzzy does have, potentially blowing him out a little bit. Because right now it's a little bit awkward to Pyro with this on 4. Like if you do this trade and then you Pyro plus a spell, it will clear the board, but the spell has to be some kind of health buff, otherwise your Blade Master's going to die, because it's going to only be on 1 health after doing this trade. So by doing this bump, it does make Wild Pyromancer a little bit more awkward. So I can see some merit behind that, but the caveat is it's a trade-off. You make your Circle of Healing potentially worse, and you make Muzzy's Circle of Healing and Ritualists, way better. Could be an argument that if Muzzy were to take this trade and Ritualist, like, you kind of lose the game anyway, even if there's an extra 2-1, like here. Maybe you're still in such a bad spot that it's not worth playing around that card. So I'm not 100% on this. It's certainly, in terms of what Muzzy's hand is right now, just the bump works out pretty well. The bump from Gallon has made this Pyromancer a little bit awkward. Obviously, if you do this trade, there's going to be 2-1 health guys left, so you can do something like Pyromancer plus spell to clear. The problem is you have to either use a heal on your Blade Master or use the sidekick and one of these two spells, and there's not great use of these spells here, to be honest, to activate the Pyro, because they're not really doing anything. All they're doing is just saying deal 1 damage to your opponents. There's no real benefit on your side from inner firing anything. Everything's going to have low health. There's no benefit of silencing your opponent's minions because they're just going to die anyway. Benefit is that you get to full clear your opponent's side of the board and keep your Blade Master alive, just about. So then you can potentially snowball from there. So like something that you should be doing against priests, or at least trying to keep their board empty so they can't use things like buffs, etc., to snowball their own advantage. If the priest has no board, you're doing pretty well for the most part. However, I think this turn, given specifically the hand context of Psychopomp and Amit, I don't think this is a turn where you need to fully clear Gallon's board. It's interesting against Priest. You want to clear their board as much, but if you dump all your tempo tools early on, you potentially risk hurting yourself super hard against things like Amit, and against things like Tolvir plus a full heal. Priest is very, very much capable of making a big body onto a board, from nowhere. There's something like Tolvir fully heal it or something like that. Is quite scary. And if you dump all your tempo tools and then the priest just drops down a big thing that you can't answer, suddenly your hand is left with a lot of slow things, and then you're not going to be able to answer those big things that the priest puts down, and then they're going to be able to snowball off of them. So you have to constantly be asking yourself, is it worth it to dump all of my tempo now, or should I look to increase my own overall tempo over a few turns instead? And what I'm specifically talking about in this situation is that with things like Psychopomp in hand and Amit, you have potentially really good ways to boost your own tempo, because if this Blade Master dies, it's the only minion in your pool, so it comes back as a 4/7 reborn, which is really powerful with a Psychopomp. So you're not too sad if this dies, to be honest, because it's almost beneficial to you that it does. Also, we kind of have the read that these 3 cards are some kind of buff for the most part for Gallon, or slow stuff. Obviously, Acolyte's still in the range. Extra Arms is probably not in the range anymore, but Divine Spirit's definitely in the range of Gallon. So there is merit to clearing the opponent's board where you can, and especially clearing this Wild Pyromancer is important because we think the Gallon has spells. Let me go back a bit. Alright, so you can't really just do this trade and leave up the Wild Pyromancer, because you're giving your opponent, tempo tools if they have spells in hands. Like if you were to do this trade and just drop this card as a 2/7 here, fine. The Amit's probably not going to die to the Pyro, but the thing is, if Gallon has any spells, with this thing being on 1 health, it's too much tempo. It's too easy for Gallon to get value out of spells and tempo out of his spells that turn. So it's something, we can't just take this trade and leave up the Pyro, so we have to deal with the Pyro. So that means using the Silence. Now, Silence is a powerful card in this matchup for dealing with really big minions and buffs like Inner Fire and stuff. So it's a bit of a shame to use it here, but I think it's justified. If we do silence the Pyromancer here and then take this trade, the Pyromancer's gone, and there's only 1 left in deck. So this being on 1 health is suddenly not that much of a problem for you. It's very likely that this 3/1 is going to trade into it next turn, and it's kind of hard for Gallon to avoid that trade happening. Like this this, because it has 4 attack, and this only has 1 health right now, it's very hard for Gallon to buff this Psychopump's health by enough that it gets a value trade here. It costs too many resources, like that. Even if it is possible for Gallon, it's something he's probably not going to do. He's probably just going to take this trade. So that trade happens a lot of the time. If we take the silence on here and we trade into it. So this 3-1 here, although we are leaving Priest with a minion, which is something you don't really want to do. I don't think this 3-1 is doing much more other than killing this Blade Master on the following turn. And that means the Psychopump on our turn 5 becomes really, really strong because it makes a 4-7 Blade Master, which is a lot of tempo, and it's going to be hard for Gallon to come back from that. What's more is this High Priest Ammit is really hard for Gallon to kill here. With just a 3-1, Extra Arm doesn't do it. He's only got 5 mana. He can't Extra Arms, or anything like that. This only has 1 health, so stuff like Inner Fire is hard for it to kill it. The best thing really is something like Topsy, which is potentially not in Gallon's range, given that we've seen him bump away his 2-5 earlier. So even if it was in his range, so it's likely not in his range, but even if it was, it is probably the best tempo tool available because it leaves him with 5 mana to do whatever he wants. But he's likely going to Topsy our 2-7, right? And then trade into it. So our 2-7 is the only thing that dies this turn. That means our Psychopomp turn 5 is going to bring back Ammit, and our turn 5 is looking pretty nice with something like Psychopump the Ammit and then Beaming Psychic for a 1-7 sidekick, which gets to maybe buff up the health of either our Ammit, or it gets to buff up the health of the Blade Master, which is a 4-1 on board, and maybe the Blade Master can value trade if you turn it into a 4-3 that turn. So it seems to me on this turn that we've got most bases covered. Obviously, if we drop Ammit, and it can potentially get silenced as well. There's only one. Sorry, that's not, that trade's not happening, and that doesn't look like a 2-7. Our 2-7, he could use a 0 mana silence on the Ammit because he's fearing like us just spamming the board with minions next turn, which is a irrelevant fear. So it's likely if he has a silence in hand, it'll come down on the 2-7 Ammit. Seems kind of, not great for us, except that we have an Inner Fire in hand. So if our Ammit gets silenced, then suddenly we can maybe Beaming Psychic our Ammit and Inner Fire it, or potentially if we were to draw even more health buffs on the next turn, we can use them as well. And then there's no more silences in deck, because there's only 1 in deck. So if the silence gets used on our Ammit to prevent our snowball, well, we're going to have a very big minion, like a 9-9, which is going to be able to trade into anything that Gallon develops on that turn. And it's likely going to snowball on the future turns. And it's really going to be very hard for Gallon to stick any minions anyway. So even if our Ammit gets silenced here, it's honestly not too bad because it uses the silence, and then we have health buffs plus Inner Fire for our big bodied minion, which is good. So what we saw here, we burn a lot of our tempo tools. We use an Inner Fire here, we use Beaming Sidekick, and we used our Wild Pyromancer. So that was a bunch of our tempo tools. Just essentially, we get to keep this over an Inner Fire, and we got to kill a 3-1. And we've developed these 2 minions instead of this minion. That's kind of the difference here. And to me, it doesn't seem like it was worth it. I think if you were to stick an Ammit, which is very likely to happen, instead of playing these, if you have an Ammit here as your turn, you have just this on board, and an Inner Fire in hand, and a Psychopump in hand, and then the 3-1 trades into here. If your turn 5 makes, Beaming Psychic Psychopump is insane, right? You make a 2-9 a 1/9, 1/7, a 3/9, and a 4/9 with Reborn. It's too many stats, and you have an Inner Fire in hand. You could potentially, if it requires it, you don't actually have to go for the Beaming Psychic. You can just go for Inner Fire or something, and the Psychopomp play. It's just so much tempo that there's no way that Gallon gets back from it. So that seems like a way bigger payoff to me than this play for Muzzy. And all Muzzy really did was, kill a 3/1. I get you want to kill the opponent's stuff, but you use an Inner Fire as well to do it. And as we're going to see from this game, losing the Inner Fire was way more costly to Muzzy than holding onto this silence, because Gallon ends up making a very big taunt, and then Muzzy just doesn't have enough attack to get through it. So, lesson to be learned, at least from this bit, is that yes, you want to clear the opponent's board, but don't use all your tempo to do so, and don't neglect developing your own overall game plan. Because to me, it looked like after this turn, if Amit came down on this turn, it was just checkmate. I think Gallon just didn't have enough to beat it, because the Psychopomp follow-up, if the Amit were to die, is just too strong anyway. So Gallon's turn 5. Not much to do. Obviously, Tolvir Circle is a nice combo, but you really don't want to be healing up this Blade Master or these two minions here. The nice thing about Divine Spiriting this Acolyte of Pain is that you're very likely to get 2 draws from it, barring a silence. Even something like Extra Arms from Muzzy, if it is a one-off in the deck, along with the silence, is a bit awkward to play, because you'd like to Extra Arms this minion up to a 6, but these things are both on 1 health. So, and also there'll be a 1/6 Acolyte on board, so playing a spell, nuking both your minions, and burning the Acolyte to draw a card doesn't seem very good. So Extra Arms is probably not going to be good. So likely what happens if you went Acolyte of Pain, Divine Spirit here is that, these two minions are going to trade into it in some form. Maybe Muzzy heals up his 2/1 to get the value trade as well. Something like that. So you're likely going to get 2 cards, and then maybe you can get onto board some way that way with the Tolvir plus full heal guy plus the second Divine Spirit might be a good turn 6, for example. Okay, so Extra Arms is actually drawn from Muzzy. Who would have known that, hey? But yeah, it's very awkward to play here, like we were just talking about. Buffing this to 6 to trade would be ideal, but this Pyromancer is acting really annoying for you right now. So it's probably not something you really want to be doing. For me personally here, the silence is also a card you want to be using on this turn, right? Because you want to prevent Gallon from getting cards, right? You're looking at giving Gallon 2 cards here, essentially, by trading into this, and then you open up, maybe he draws his second Pyromancer, maybe he draws his second Psychopomp, and if you have a board of a 4/1, a 2/1, and a 3/1, maybe that's a way for Gallon to get back into the game. So it's a bit scary in that regard for giving Gallon 2 cards here, but it's very hard for you to silence this and not have it hurt you too much, because really, what can you do? You can heal up this thing. That doesn't seem great, and then silence this, and then it will prevent him from drawing cards. But then you have to trade into it again. It seems like it's just the Pyromancer is just hurting yourself too much on this turn, I think, for you to go for some sort of silence play. It's going to be hurting too many things. Instead, I think this turn, just keep it simple, right? Just trade, play the Amit. Right? Amit's very likely to stick. It could get hit by the 1 of silence from your opponent, especially giving them 2 cards. But unless he's got a wild Pyromancer, or the second Psychopomp, and the Psychopomp reses the Pyromancer, which is not super likely, you're going to have a 4/1, a 3/1 Pyro, and an Amit with a Psychopomp in hand, and Amit into Psychopomp is very powerful, potentially. You don't really want to Psychopomp here if you trade, by the way, because it's going to res this guy. And you don't really want to waste Psychopomp just resing a 1-2, essentially. So I think it's, even though you give Gallon 2 cards, what he's lacking is tempo. And I think you'll get enough tempo if you Amit here onto the board. You have a 4-1, a 3-1, and an Amit. And although Gallon gets 2 extra resources, they're not going to matter because you're going to have a silence in hand. So if he tries to make a big board buff, he's going to get screwed by that. You can potentially just play super hard onto the board if your Amit sticks, which is very likely too. So yeah, it seems like another turn where Amit should just be coming down this turn instead of the silence. The silence just, it'd be nice to silence the Acolyte to stop the resources, but it just hurts your board too much. So yeah, Muzzy nukes like half his board. He loses his Pyro and his 2-1 when he could have just lost his 2-1 and develops onto the board, and the extra arms of his remaining mana, which is not great mana efficiency. For his next turn, he's only got 6 mana, and he's got a 4, a 4, and a 3, which doesn't add up too well. Instead, he could have had, a 4 on the board, and then potentially double 3 in hand for a good turn 6, which is way better for mana efficiency. And in terms of actual stats on board, he'd have a 4-1, a 3-1 Pyro, and a 2-7 here, with the threat of Psychopomp. The 2-7 is so threatening, but in here it's just one singular 6-3, and your next turn is likely looking pretty slow because it's not going to be mana efficient, and it's likely dropping one of these two. And the Psychopomp itself is not rezzing ideal targets. It's rezzing either Beaming Psychic or a Wild Pyromancer at this point. So this card is also weaker based on the plays we've seen from Muzzy as well. So yeah, Gallon ends up getting a pretty high tempo play here, and it's going to cost Muzzy. Also, another downside to what Muzzy did is he used his fast cards. His cards that affect the board from hand. He used a silence, and he used 1/2 of extra arms. These are cards like it's like a slow before fast principle in Hearthstone. If you can get away with developing slow stats on a turn, you should do it, because if your opponent presents a threat, then you can use your fast stats to deal with it. If you go fast then slow, you're gonna not be able to deal with a threat, essentially, because you've used all your fast things. All you've got left in hand is to develop slow stats, and then that's going to allow your opponent to dictate trades. It's going to allow your opponent to keep minions alive and snowball from there, potentially. So, play slow before fast when appropriate. For downside, yeah, it seems like you just gotta hope something sticks. Tolvir, Ritualist, Spirit for a big boy on this turn. Yeah, seems pretty good. So what we're talking about, slow stats before fast stats, or essentially, is that we're left in a bit of a problem here because we cannot kill this taunt, and our turn is a little bit awkward. Obviously these two pair pretty well together. An Amit on 14 health is hard to deal with from the opposing side. So it's likely going to stick, and then you can snowball from there. But this is something that should have happened 2 turns ago, and definitely 1 turn ago. The Amit should be coming down, and the snowball would have already happened. But now it's actually going to turn out to be a bit too late, how things play out. It's worth noting, if we had just double traded, obviously there'd be 2 more cards in Gallon's hand, so he might not have even done this play, but this was like his best play on a turn 6, so it was unlikely to happen, to be honest. from Muzzy's perspective. So he, in not giving the card draw to Gallon, he's reduced the chance of a strong turn like this happening. So we are kind of seeing, you know, a low roll from Muzzy's perspective in that Gallon had such a high tempo turn 6, because it's not going to happen that often. So that is one of the benefits to Muzzy's play. But given it did happen, if we had a 4-1, a 3-1, and a 2-7 here, with a silence and two extra arms in hand, we would be in a lot better shape, I'd say, in terms of dealing with this 2-12. We could silence it for 1 to reduce half of its health, make it a 2-6. Obviously, this pyro makes things a bit awkward, so you want to silence ideally before you trade your pyro. Obviously, these two being both on 1 health, you can't heal them both up, so things do get a little bit awkward. The silence maybe doesn't come down, but you have a lot more resources available to you in terms of dealing with your opponent's side of the board and developing your side of the board if we had gone for this board state whilst giving Gallon 2 extra cards. Because really, in terms of tempo, this kind of board state for a turn 6 from Priest on an empty board is pretty much the best they can hope for. So we're essentially dealing with the same amount of tempo here. Gallon's likely would have just not played the 2 extra cards that he got from hand. Okay, so Muzzy's going to go for Amit Divine Spirit, which is a powerful play. Gallon still has a silence in his deck available for it. Also has Topsy Turvy, which is a huge answer to it as well, and Inner Fires potentially. By doing this bump, you limit Inner Fire as a way to deal with it though, which is, so silence and Topsy are ways to deal with it. But by doing this bump, you mean Inner Fire is not going to be a way to deal with it on his own. Obviously, Gallon has a Circle of Healing in hand, so it was a 2-card combo, Circle plus Inner Fire, to be able to deal with this Amit. So most times, given there's only 2 cards in Gallon's hand, this Amit's probably going to stick as on 14 health. Likely, by what's going to happen, we see this bump with the 6-3 into the 2-12 to make it onto 6 health. And then this trade's probably going to happen on the turn after, and maybe Gallon heals up his Tolvir, and you're going to have a 2-14, and your turn 7's probably going to be these two together. So you'll leave them with a Tolvir for maybe a couple turns on high health, but you're going to limit Inner Fire. Yeah, so here's the board state that happened after the trades. So likely this trade's going to happen. Heal's going to come down onto this in some form, maybe with whatever he top decks. If he did draw, if one of the cards in hand is Inner Fire, which it could be, this is only going to go up to an 8-8. And it can't kill this. It can bump into it and make it a 2-6, which is, okay. But you're likely not going to be double bumping it, because you can't really leave this as a 6-1 if you just use your 8-8 to bump into the 2-14, because it's going to be an 8-6 after that. So this trade is just too bad for you. So the 2-3 has to kill this one. There's a lot of mess here, but I hope you understood what I meant. Unfortunately for Muzz, Circle plus Inner Fire allows him to kill the 2-14. It does heal up the Blade Master, but the Blade Master's health doesn't matter too much when you have such a big Tolvir, because there's no silence left in the deck. Obviously this turn, so you don't really want to buff the health of this Blade Master, but killing the Amit is so worth it, that it's worth doing. Fortunately, you can't take this trade before you do the circle stuff, because this only goes up to a 2-12, and then it becomes a 12-12, which doesn't kill this. I mean, it could be reasonable not to kill it, leave it as just a 2-2, and then you get to kill this. But is that worth it? I mean, you potentially get really screwed if your opponent draws one of their ritualists, which they have 2 still in deck. If they draw this card, then this becomes a 2/14 again. You're going to be in a bit of trouble. Also, like, second circle of healing as well. Potentially super scary for you. So I think, you get to keep your 2/3 around as well by doing this bump, which is a benefit for you. So I think, obviously the Blade Master is a bit scary, but I think it's worth not killing it in favor of killing the Amit. Okay, so things are looking awful for Muzzy. He went for a game plan of limiting what Gallon could do by limiting card draw, limiting minions, but he's left in a spot, rather unfortunately, I'd say, from a high tempo set of cards when Gallon doesn't have many cards, right? First of all, the huge Tolvir, which came out of nowhere when he had only like 3 or 4 cards. And then the Circle plus Inner Fire to kill the Amit is just really bad for Muzzy. So although I've been criticizing Muzzy plays, he definitely has low rolled a bit in terms of the outcome of this match. Like, a lot of times he would win with his game plan against like an average draw from Gallon. But things are really bad now. We've used our Inner Fire, we've used our Silence. Amit's dead. No Psychopomp. We have a Psychopomp, but it might, hit something bad. And even if this, high rolls and hits the Amit, is it even good? Like, we have nothing to play with it this turn, right? And this thing's just going to kill the Amit, and then this thing's going to kill the other one, the second half of Amit. And there's nothing we can do to stop it. So actually hitting the Amit off the Psychopomp isn't even particularly better, I would say, than hitting a Pyro. I'd say it's probably even worse than hitting the Pyro, just because the Pyro has 3 attack. And the 3 attack's going to do better against this Tolvir. So even though it might seem like a high roll to hit the Amit, given the circumstances, this got so much attack, the health on the Amit really doesn't matter. Okay, so we did high roll, quote, the Amit, which is certainly better than the Beaming Sidekick, but still not great. I mean, there's some argument, actually, given our circumstance, that we should have taken this trade before we Psychopomped. Because what we're really lacking right now is attack power. We have like barely any left in deck. We've used an Inner Fire, we've used our Silence, we have only 1/2 of this extra arms. So really, we're kind of looking for attack power on the board, and if we get our Blade Master into the pool, because this thing's probably taking this trade at some point, either from our opponent next turn, or from like, just down the line, we're going to be taking this trade. So doing it now is probably fine, because it makes your Psychopomp potentially better if you high roll the Blade Master. It changes the odds. You really don't want to hit the Amit, honestly. It's just got too low attack, and it's just going to die to this. I think you want to hit number 1 the Blade Master, and then number 2 the Wild Pyromancer that you got, and they're just going to allow you to get through this thing. Just you just need attack, basically. But given this did come back, what do we do? Do we go for shield or more arms? I'm given that we have little cards in hand, I'm inclined to go for the shield, because mana's not going to be an issue for the upcoming turns. We're likely going to be floating mana in some form, so it doesn't make sense to be mana efficient here. In terms of the extra arms, we can just make use of the hero power. Also, if we were to high roll a 1-drop or a 2-drop from this powered shield, we could play it this turn. So if we've got like a Cleric or a Light Warden or a Tolvir or whatever, the shield makes sense. I think we probably should be shielding this so that this trade can't happen on the next turn. It's probably the case that this trade happens and then this trade happens on the second half. And like buffing this guy, buffing this doesn't really benefit you too much, I don't think. There also is a bit of an argument that you shouldn't be using Cleric here as a 1/7. Yeah, this Cleric definitely represents card draw for you right now, and an extra card is very important in this spot because you need to be hitting your inner fire or whatever's more minions, more resources, because you need a lot more than what you've got to deal with this. And if this trade happens, and this trade happens, which is somewhat likely, I think you're fine with it, to be honest. And then the next turn you can use the Cleric to draw a card. You can heal your Blade Master this turn, make it up to 9 health. And then you start threatening inner fire on it a little bit better, because if you heal it up again on the turn after, because I think this can go up to 11 right now. I think if you can heal up to 11, then you're suddenly threatening an inner fire of your own, and you're using the Cleric to draw from it. What happens here is Muzzy plays this as a 1/7, and Gallon recognizes that the threat from Muzzy isn't the Amit in this spot, it's card draw. So he correctly kills the Cleric and then takes this trade here into the 3/1, which is also something that we could have prevented a little bit with the shield. I think maybe you should have been a bit greedier here and gone for more cards instead of the immediate tempo, because the Cleric's likely just going to die with no benefit. The Amit living really doesn't help you too much here. Like I said, the health on your minions doesn't matter too much at this point when you're facing down this big thing. You just need more attack. Yeah, Gallon's turn 8. Obviously, Cycle Point is coming down. The only question is whether you want to trade this thing first or afterwards. An Acolyte would be a pretty nice one to get here because card draw is lovely. But outside of that, I don't think you want to have higher health on your stuff, given that, you know, Muzzy stuff's all got pretty high health, and you also have this taunt to protect your guys from trades anyway. I think you want high attack, that way you can dictate trades. So I don't think you want to do the trade first. I think you want to increase the odds specifically to get Acolyte from your Psychopomp, which is the huge high roll, so not trading first increases that. And you also want to probably hit your Pyros or your other Psychopomp just for higher attack power. But yeah, also this trade needs to happen because you need to stop Muzzy getting any resources here. Like the Psychopomp, the Amit's not a problem. It's the card draw. Also, like, you want to heal your minions, so you need to kill the Cleric so you can heal the minions anyway. Right, so not looking great for Muzzy here. We're starting to really lose control of the board. Killing this 12-11 is impossible in this scenario. We only have 8 potential power on board. What we can do is kind of spread wide. These two minions here only have 6 power between them. So they're not going to be able to kill anything other than the second half of this Amit. So what we can do is spread wide and prevent these from trading into stuff other than the second half of the Amit. So like likely this trade happens, and then maybe this into the 2/1 Amit or something like that on the next turn, which is, you know, fine, I think. What Muzzy goes for is he trades here and then full heals his Amit, which doesn't really make sense to me. You lose out initially on the Ritualist getting buffed to 7 health, and you kind of just giving Gallon free trades. Like, you don't really care if you full heal the second half of this, because you're sacrificing the first half to do so. Like, yeah, you do this trade happens. If you don't trade, but you're giving that trade to them anyway to give your second half more health, but the health that you give this is taken away from this. So in terms of how Gallon cleans up the board, it's really no different for him, except that you made it a bit quicker for him, I think. So where's the extra arms goes? Obviously, if you extra arms the Amit and put it to 9, you make the Ritualist 9 health instead of 7, which is marginally better, I'd say. Probably not too impactful, given that trades are likely going to have to happen into this big thing here, and it might be the case that 7 equals 9 when it comes to trading into this anyway. The benefit of buffing up the Blade Master is that it gets beyond 12 health when you fully heal it and extra arms it. So there's potential for the Blade Master to survive a 12 attack hit from this Tolvir. So if it survives the attack, you want to have more health and more damage on the Blade Master specifically, rather than on the Amit. So yeah, you can kind of see the play that Muzz went for. I think you do want to kill this 12 attack thing, but doing these trades doesn't really help, because the health that you get on Amit is subtracted from this other card, and you're just really not changing the board state enough. But yeah, I think maybe Muzz was thinking that maybe he miscounted. I'm not sure he miscounted. Doesn't seem likely, but something went wrong. You could see him frustrated about this turn. The Tolvir is about to die, and Gallon then has to consider that Amit's a real threat once it dies, because you're not going to have such a high attack value to be able to one-shot minions anymore. So if this thing dies, then Amit actually does become a problem. So it's likely that Amit has to die because of that on this turn. So the trades are likely going to happen into the Amit, and then you're going to have these 2 minions still left alive. It's pretty bad here that the hero power comes onto the Tolvir now and makes it 12-3. This trade happens, and then this trade happens, right? And this is a 12-1. And you have no way to ping this as a 12-1, so then this trade has to happen afterwards, which is really feels bad, man, for your Blade Master. Well, obviously this trade might happen as well into the 2-1 rather than the 3-1. Debatable on that one. So yeah, this worked out really poorly from doing this trade for Gallon initially, because before, I guess what would happen after you do the bump is that this would be a 12-3, and this would be a 2-7, and this would be Reborn. We'll give this an R for Reborn. So likely what would happen is this trade happens again, and then maybe this trade happens, and then he probably thinks about what he has to heal, because I guess he'll heal this up back to a 12-3, so this trade can't happen, right? So in that circumstance, Gallon would have a 3-2, this thing with Reborn, unless he wants to trade this instead of the 3-1, and you'd have this next minion that he's going to play, and you'd have to do this trade probably still anyway, but you'd still have this 2-7 left over, which is pretty important to have this 2-7 left over, because it lets you kill this with a value trade, or it lets you kill this with value trade, which is something that Muzzy's not going to have available anymore. So yeah, we kind of by doing what we did, we've kind of sped up Gallon and had to waste our 8 attack into this 12-3 anyway. and we've lost out on a 2-7 because of it. And you can see Muzzy's not happy with what happened. Possible he miscounted, and he thought that the 12-1 would die on that turn. Who knows? Yeah, so Gallon does choose to, keep more attack on board, give himself more trades, because there's no pyro. There's no pyro things going to happen because Muzzy is only top decking at this point. So even if he does top deck his second pyro, he's got no spells to activate it anyway. So I do like Gallon deciding to trade with the reborn minion and give himself more options for trades in the future. In a pretty feels bad situation, has to trade into this 12-1 with his Blade Master anyway this turn, which would really suck. This 12-1 got so much work done for Gallon this game. But yeah, in this scenario, he would have had a 2-7 had he not traded his Amit preemptively, and that 2-7 would have done like wonders in terms of trading into this board. It would likely kill, 3 of these minions over the course of a few turns. Instead, we only have a 2-5 that we just played. So this turn, Gallon makes a bit of a whoopsie and trades his 3-1 and then extra arms and kills off his other Pyromancer, which is a bit bad. Bit of a brain fart, but whatever. Obviously the play that makes the most sense in terms of board control is to trade Pyro. That makes sense, right? And then this will be on 2-2. And then you extra arms this guy to make it a 5-2 because the Pyro effect of this will trigger. This goes to 1. This goes also to 1. And then you extra arms the second Pyro. And this will go to a 5-2. And this will die. So you have, and this will go to a 1. So you can, choose which one of these two you use your hero power on, and then send 10 damage to the face. Instead, bit of a cock up, and then ends up only having 1 minion killing off his other guy. But whatever. Yeah, pretty bad top deck for Muzz. I think the game's probably escaped him at this point. Definitely when the Cleric draw comes down from Gallon, there's really no way to come back from Muzzy. He's used pretty much all of his good cards, and there's no way you get back on board from at this point when you're top decking as Priest. So yeah, definitely quite a few mistakes, I'd say. Muzzy not happy with how he played that game, understandably so. I think Gallon is also a little bit frustrated that he made such a blatant misplay, I would say, at the end. Which is gonna this is the first game in the series. That's probably gonna weigh on your mind coming into the next games, which is something you, as a player, if you want to play at the top level, you need to be able to come from these situations. Yeah, you made a mistake, but you need to move on from it and not have it tilt you, which is going to be hard to do, especially in the opening game. Luckily, it didn't really affect the outcome of the game. He was already very far ahead. In terms of how this game was played, I really quite liked how Gallon played for the most part. In terms of hand quality, both starting hands were pretty bad for both players. So there was a lot of decisions. Usually in the Priest mirror, one side gets a better starting hand and just snowballs the game from there. But that didn't happen this game. There was a lot of talking points and a lot of things that both sides could have done a bit better, I think. The only thing I didn't really like from Gallon was the early bump of the 2-5. I understand why he did it. It's obviously still up for a little bit of debate on that one. But I think he was just kind of limiting his own high rolls via top decks, as it were, to play around things that were still really bad for him anyway. In terms of Muzzy's side, I think he was a bit too slow in going for his Amit. I think his Amit should have come down a couple of turns earlier, and he should have been less focused on completely clearing Gallon's board on a couple of particular turns, and he would have led himself to better tempo and likely would have won in the game, I think. A little bit unfortunate from him that Gallon ended up having such a high tempo hand, because Muzzy was trying to restrict Gallon's side of the board, restrict his options, restrict his card draw. But it ended up that Gallon ended up hitting really high tempo tools regardless. So Muzzy's game plan there didn't really work out too well. But I still think if he went for the Amit earlier, he's pretty much got all bases covered, and he would have, I think, won the game. All right, that's game one. I hope you enjoyed this video. I will be doing the second 2 games as well later this week. I'll be posting them up as well. They're not as interesting as this game, I'd say, but it's still worth watching and worth analysing. But if you enjoyed this video, be sure to give me a like. It helps out a lot. I stream on Twitch as well. Check me out on there, twitch.tv/Jambre. Follow me on Twitter if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next one, which will be coming on pretty shortly. See ya.